Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Bishop E.W. Jackson coming to you with a response to the President's message to a joint session of Congress. I want to be as respectful as I can about the President and about his speech. I clearly disagree with him profoundly, and I trust that I will be able to express myself in a way that at least respects the office, even if I don't respect Joe Biden. I have to say, I thought that speech, while he had some patriotic words in it, he had some nice phrases in it, as far as I'm concerned, it was the biggest bunch of lying propaganda I've ever heard come out of the mouth of a politician. And frankly, it harkened back as far as I'm concerned, to Barack Obama. The same empty pablum, the same nonsense, the same promises, and absolutely, in my view, no intention of doing anything but trying to amass power for the Democrat Party, not trying to serve the American people. First of all, we can't spend ourselves out of our problems. We're going to spend ourselves into oblivion. He had a smorgasbord of spending in that speech that would choke a horse. It is not realistic to think that the American people, the taxpayers of this country, can afford to spend the kind of money that he is talking about spending. And for me, the bottom line is, what it all boils down to is socialism. Because basically what he said to us tonight was, we're going to have the government take care of everything and take care of everybody. We're going to rebuild our infrastructure. We're going to give out Medicare. We're going to pay for school, and we're going to pay for education. And we're going to pay for everything. The fact of the matter is, he doesn't have any money to pay for anything. The money belongs to the American people. And in order to spend that money, unless you're going to print us into inflation, he's got to collect that money from the American people. And this idea, again, an indication of the economic illiteracy of the left, and this president clearly represents the left. The idea that you can raise taxes on corporations and that they won't pass those costs along to the consumer is a level of economic ignorance that is hard to fathom in a president. Corporations have products which are, for the most part, elastic. They pass the costs on to us. And most people, when they want a product, they buy a product, they need a product. The fact that that product goes up $1 or goes up $2 or $5 or $10 doesn't deter them. They just pay the money. They don't realize what they're really paying is the corporation's taxes. So he raises corporate taxes, and we're all supposed to applaud him. Oh, wonderful, because now the corporations are going to pay their fair share. They're going to pass the cost along to the American people. It is the American people that will bear the brunt of these increases that he has in mind. And it is the American people whose pocketbooks will feel it, because the wealthy won't. Well, look, my plan tonight was to go through this president's speech point by point. But I decided not to do that because there's so much garbage in it and propaganda in it that I just waste my time walking his trail. So let me give you my blueprint, what I think he should have said tonight. And then you can contrast that with what he did say if you watched the speech at all. And I watched the entire speech. Here's number one. The president should have said to the American people that it is time to end the racial divide. It is time to once and for all end the racial demagoguery, all of this speechifying about systemic racism, which is never defined, by the way. It is never defined. It is never put into any concrete circumstance that anybody can understand. It's just in the air. And what it means is that America is a racist country. It is time to stop dividing us by race. It is time to stop denigrating our country as a racist country. I noticed the president didn't mention anything about the racial division that has been stoked by Black Lives Matter, that does nothing but run up and incite riots and looting and murders whenever there is a confrontation between a police officer and a black person, and they completely ignore all the children that are dying in the streets of our cities. And the best the president could do tonight was to blame it on guns, as if you outlaw the guns or you take the guns away from law-abiding citizens and the criminals won't have them anymore to do what they do. Here again, I don't believe that this president is competent to sit in that office. Because anybody with a brain ought to understand that law-abiding citizens are the ones who are going to adhere to your regulations to the extent that they feel they can. And lawless criminals don't care. Well, lawless criminals. People who don't obey the law don't care. Criminals don't care. So all you can do is try to crack down on law-abiding citizens. And he brings up the large capacity magazines and all of that. Well, shooting, and I'm one of those people who shoots, is a recreational sport. And so what difference does it make what the size of your magazine is? You're target shooting. You're having fun. Folks, it's just preposterous. And you're not hurting anyone doing that. You're not injuring anyone doing that. You're not putting anyone in danger doing that. But the criminal is going to get whatever they need to get to carry out whatever bad intentions they have. We need to debunk once and for all this lying propaganda that America is a white supremacist, racist country with pervasive systemic racism governing everything and everybody, and stop it. So that's why I don't go through his speech. I won't go through his that ridiculous mess he just gave us point by point, because you can't talk about unity in America and not denounce Black Lives Matter and Antifa. He talked about the so-called insurrection that happened at the Capitol. And let me make clear, I've denounced that. I think it was wrong to storm the Capitol. It was wrong to go inside the Capitol. I think people should not do that. Peacefully protest, as President Trump then said, go to the Capitol and protest peacefully and patriotically. However, it was not an insurrection. It was not an attempt to overthrow the government. It was a riot. It was lawlessness, and it got out of hand. But notice they never apply those terms to the police stations that have been burned, ransacked, attacked, the federal government buildings that have been attacked, the police officers that have been attacked, the city halls that have been attacked all over this country. They don't mention that. Those are not insurrections. Those are just riots. Those are just peaceful protests that get out of hand. Stop the racial demagoguery. Stop stoking racism. That's point number one. Point number two, he ought to have talked about restoring a sense of our Judeo-Christian values, because those are the things that really hold a nation together. The police can't do that, and we're seeing how futile it is for them to even try once people get it in their minds that they're not interested in obeying the law and they don't care about the police. It is values that hold us together. And we need to come back to those Judeo-Christian values that once were the glue that allowed this country to adhere, to hold together, regardless of the color of anybody's skin. Faith. There is a God to whom we all answer. I noticed when he quoted the Declaration of Independence, he talked about we're created, but he didn't talk about our creator. The founders did. They said we are endowed by our creator. He skipped that part. But faith, and I'm talking about Christian faith. When I say Judeo-Christian, I'm talking about the Old and New Covenants, the Old and New Testament, and the values that those instill, and the values that our founding fathers believed in and suggested to us for time immemorial. America doesn't work without God. It was George Washington who said, "It is the duty of all nations to obey Almighty God." to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey his will, to be grateful for his benefits, and to humbly implore his favor and protection. It was John Adams who said, our government was designed for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other. That's what we've got to come back to. Faith. Faith in God. Faith in the God of the Bible. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. And you shall not commit adultery. You shall not covet. And those fundamental values that used to be the foundation for our country. And the Word of God says in Psalm 11:3, if the foundation be destroyed, what shall the righteous do? We got to stand up for those values again. Faith, family, that marriage is sacred and important and is a foundational institution for our country. That marriage is a union between one man and one woman. That's it. That's all. There is no such thing as a marriage between two men or a marriage between two women. That is an abomination and a fiction that has been created by the homosexual activists, and then the Supreme Court has sanctioned it in a decision that was just as wrong as Roe v. Wade. We need to come back to Judeo-Christian values and principles, because that was what held the country together. And as we go into this idea of moral relativism, and there is no truth, there's your truth and my truth, and look what it's doing to us. You got a country in which people don't know whether they're male or female, or that there's even any difference. You got a country that's setting black against white, against yellow, against brown, however you want to name the colors, but setting people against one another on the basis of the complexion of their skin. We need to come back to faith. We need to come back to real family. And that's one man, one woman in the bonds of holy matrimony, bringing their children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And then we need to come back to freedom. The principle of freedom, of liberty. Because as far as I'm concerned, that speech he gave was an attack on liberty. Every time somebody mentions the homosexual activists, what they're saying to Christians is, shut up. We don't need your religion and your morals and your values, because we have a new system of values and a new system of morals. And those of you who believe in the Bible had better watch yourselves, because what we are uplifting is homosexuality and transgenderism. That's the new order of the day. We want it in our military. We want it in our schools. We want it in our colleges. We want it everywhere we look. And you people who are trying to live a decent, godly life, husbands and wives, fathers and mothers raising children, you are passé. We need to come back to faith and family and liberty. And liberty means that every Christian in this country has the right to hold to our Judeo-Christian values and principles without losing our jobs, without having our businesses attacked, without having our reputation stained, without having people call us bigots and haters. Now, don't get me wrong. They can call me whatever they want. I am never going to stop saying the things I'm saying, because just like Joe Biden, the people who tell us we're wrong to believe that marriage is a union between one man and one woman are deceived, and they are liars. They don't know what they're talking about, and we do. And Joe Biden should have brought us back to those principles: faith, family, freedom. He should have talked about protecting Christians against the discrimination that's taking place, because every time you hear one of these companies jump up and get up in arms about, as the National Basketball League and others did, about North Carolina and Indiana's bathroom bills to try to protect children from predators, males claiming to be females, going into female bathrooms, locker room showers. Every time they do that, what they're saying is, we hate Christians and we hate Christianity and we hate God. And we're not going to let him govern our country. We're not going to let his rules govern our country. And anybody who adheres to that, if we can find them, if we can identify them, we're going to make sure they suffer. And I'm not exaggerating, and you know I'm not exaggerating. How about the protection that Christians need in these companies that have gone whole hog into wokeness? Christians have been believing what we believe about marriage, about life, for 2,000 years. How long has this whole LGBTQ perversion been going on? It hasn't been 2,000 years that people have been telling us, oh, no. This is good and right and special and appropriate. And you people who believe it's not, you are the wrong ones. Christians need to be protected from this onslaught. And anybody, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, need to be protected from this onslaught against those of us who believe in traditional values. If you want to bring the country back together, you need to stop these political predators from trying to destroy anybody who doesn't agree with them. Christians don't try to destroy people who don't agree with them. We try to persuade people. But these leftists, because they're godless, don't understand that. And the only thing they know is raw power and to try to destroy anybody who gets in the way of their agenda. How are you going to have unity in a country when you got people who think like that? We Christians say we love people who don't agree with us. We really do. We love them. We pray for them. We want to persuade them. The left says we'll destroy anybody who doesn't agree with us. And we've seen it happen again and again and again. And look, here's the third thing that he needed to say. It is time to end the ghetto. It is time to dispense with these enclaves of poverty and violence and drug addiction and poor education and police confrontation where the police are vilified and the thug is lionized. We need to stop that. George Floyd is no hero. No, he did not deserve to die. No, he did not deserve to have a man put his foot on his neck or his knee on his neck for 9.5 minutes. I am completely with you on that. I am in full-blown agreement with it without reservation or equivocation. But the fact that he suffered that does not mean that the man is a saint. We ought to be admiring people who are going to school, studying, working, taking care of their responsibilities. But you know why we don't? Because those people aren't having confrontations with cops. Those people are busy living law-abiding lives. So they don't really count. We've got to have a George Floyd who is a meth addict, a fentanyl addict, who gets into a situation with police because he's passing counterfeit money and tragically loses his life, and he should not have lost his life. Let me make that crystal clear. And that Chauvin should be in jail. That exactly, he's going to jail, and he ought to go to jail. But that doesn't make George Floyd Martin Luther King. And you know what I was thinking as I listened to him talking about naming a law after George Floyd? Why don't you name a law after Jaslyn Adams, a 7-year-old shot to death in her car, sitting in a McDonald's line by a bunch of black thugs? Why don't you name it after these other innocent young children who have been shot to death, doing nothing wrong to anybody because they're too young and too innocent to have done anything to anybody anyway? And they're ignored. The left just walks over their graves like they never even existed. And suddenly George Floyd is the icon that we all ought to be admiring. It's sick. It's disgusting. It's twisted. What is the message we want to send to children? If you really want to be well known and you really want to be admired, go out and get hooked on meth and get hooked on fentanyl and pass counterfeit money, and maybe you'll get into a confrontation with police in which you might tragically and unjustly might lose your life. But no, don't worry. Everybody will see you as a hero. Now, I know that's ugly, but it needs to be said. Because if you really care about rescuing the black community and these ghettos from the condition that people are living in, you can't make heroes out of people like George Floyd. Sympathize for him, yes. He didn't deserve to die. Put Chauvin away, I'm in agreement with that. I think the man was grossly out of order and grossly wrong. And I think might be a sociopath or something, because of just the cavalier way that he did it. But none of that makes George Floyd a hero. And we need to pick some better heroes. No wonder the left is perpetuating the ghetto, because those are the people they hold up as icons. What about those kids that are going home after school and studying because they want to do something better with their lives? What about those kids who are harassed because they refuse to join a gang because they want something better for their lives? What about those parents who wish they could get out, but maybe they can't afford to, but they want their children to get out, so they're encouraging their children to study, like my father did for me? What about them? They're the heroes, and they're not the ones in the streets having confrontations with cops because they're busy doing something productive with their lives. You want to end the ghetto? Got to get back to those fundamental values of faith, family, and freedom. Freedom means personal responsibility. We need to begin to teach these young people the way I was taught, the way some of you who are watching me right now were taught. My father said, son, you don't ask anybody to do for you what you can do for yourself. You don't ever take from someone else what belongs to them, that they've worked to earn, to get, because you're less than a man when you take what belongs to someone else from them. My father used to say to me, son, if your word is no good, you're no good. A man is as good as his word. And my father used to teach me to respect authority. And that if I had a problem with someone in authority, police officer or otherwise, come to him. But how are you going to do that in the inner city when you got a bunch of profligate men who won't take care of their children? And by the way, God bless the men who are. I am in no way denigrating you. God bless you. But let's not kid ourselves. I live about 2 hours from Richmond. 80% of the children born in the black community in Richmond are born out of wedlock. 70% of the children are raised in single-parent, female-headed households. Their fathers are nowhere to be found. If you want to end the ghetto, you've got to rebuild the family. You've got to have school choice. You've got to make sure that these children can get an education and come out of these decrepit, non-accredited, broken down schools that teachers' unions are in control of, who are more interested in their own power and influence than they are in those children. And if you can begin to give people opportunity, what you will see is groups don't rise up, individuals do. And when the ethic and culture of a community changes to value education, to value personal responsibility, to value fatherhood and motherhood, to value taking care of your children, to value hard work, to value staying out of trouble, to value a spirit of excellence that would say, oh, they tell you black people don't do well in math. Well, you're going to prove them wrong. Oh, they tell you you don't have to speak proper English. Well, you're going to prove to them that you can speak proper English as well or better than anybody else. You're going to learn to read and analyze and write and speak and do math and solve problems and debate and discuss in a civilized way. You're going to become an educated person. If everybody starts teaching their children that, as opposed to teaching them the cops are out to kill you, individuals would rise up. And as individuals rise up, guess what? The ghetto dissipates, because there's nobody who is there looking for the pathological, degenerate life that it can so easily offer and capture people in. And when I say these things, I was raised in the ghetto. My wife lived in the projects. That scourge ought to end, but you don't have a single person. I guarantee you, I am the only person you've heard call for an end to the ghetto, because we take it as the norm. Because the abnormal has become normal, and all this president did was to perpetuate the abnormalities that are plaguing our country right now. So we need to do those 4 things. And we need to bolster America's military and economy. We need to get prepared for the fact that China hates our guts, that they want to overcome us and overrun us. And if we don't get our act together and start realizing Communist China is not an autocracy, Communist China is a communist dictatorship and a totalitarian nation. It is a totalitarian dictatorship. It is a brutal, bloodthirsty, irrational, murderous, torturous regime. And Biden said, well, you know, autocracy, like they're just mildly autocratic. I mean, that's why I call it lying propaganda. We need to get ready for the possibility that we may have to face a military confrontation with China one day, or with Russia, or we could see a resurgence of terrorism. We need to be ready for that. In my view, we need to enhance our special operations troops, both their training. We need to upgrade their equipment. We need to recruit more of them, because I think that in the future, we're going to be relying much, much more on special ops people to carry out specific tactical military operations than we are trying to field hundreds of thousands of soldiers and Marines on some battlefield. But we better have a strong military, because if we don't, we send a message to Communist China that we are ripe for the taking. And you say, well, Bishop, in 2021, how in the world can you say such a thing? Because human nature has not changed. The modern era has not changed the hearts of people. And the Bible clearly teaches that the days are going to come when there will be a leader who will rise up and conquer the entire world and turn the whole world into his slaves. And he will be a bloodthirsty killer and a warlord. Human nature has not changed. And weakness invites subjugation and conflict and war. George Washington said the best way to secure the peace is to be prepared for war. And somebody needs to speak straight to the American people and tell them that. And you do that not because you want war, but because you don't want war. He didn't say, and he should have said, we need to rein in big tech. Big tech is an existential threat to the future of this nation. They are as wealthy as many countries, and they are using that wealth as an oligarchical tool of the Democrat Party. And they need to be reined in. They should not be controlling your free speech and mine. They should not be. I've been suspended from Twitter, and for nothing. Not because I said something profane, pornographic. I just pointed out that the Sri Lankan attack was done by Muslims, and that was enough. I guess that was hateful. Even though it was factual, that was hateful. You don't point out facts because, after all, if the facts don't comport with the narrative that the left wants to convey, then you're a hateful person and they've got to shut you down. I'm serious, folks. That's all it was. And I was so-called suspended, but the suspension is apparently permanent. And I appealed it, but the appeal was never heard. These people should not have that kind of power. Yeah, I know that these are so-called private companies, but they are a case of the first impression because they are exercising a level of power unlike any other corporate or private entity has ever exercised in the history of this country to control one of the most fundamental values and freedoms of our nation, that is freedom of speech, and they should not be allowed to do it. They need to be broken up. A good president, in my view, would say that. They need to be broken up, period. We need to bring antitrust suits against them because they are a threat to the future of our country. And by the way, somebody needs to get to President Joe Biden and tell him that America is not a democracy. It is a constitutional republic. And there is a difference. And if you don't understand the difference, go read the Federalist Papers and see what James Madison, the father of our Constitution, had to say about it. But I don't have time to educate him. And here's the last thing. Well, next to last, we need to demand that educational institutions stop teaching our people to hate our country. Now, Joe Biden has some decent things to say about America. The problem is his actions don't bear out that rhetoric. We need to make sure that our educational institutions, no nation can survive teaching its own people to hate their country. We need to teach our people the nobility of America. And yes, we've made mistakes. And no, we're not a perfect country, but we are a noble country. And we have a history that we can be proud of. We have things in our history that, yeah, we wish they were different, but America wasn't born in a vacuum. America was established in a historical and cultural and political context. Unlike what this stupid senator we have in Virginia, Tim Kaine, said, America, basically what he said was America invented slavery. That's a lie. America didn't invent slavery. America inherited it from not only from Great Britain, but from all of Europe and from the world. But only America founded itself on the principle that every human being is the sacred creation of Almighty God and is given rights and liberties by Almighty God that no government should be able to take away. And all of these dummies running around talking about, yeah, but they were slaveholders. But you know what? I'm an heir of those words. And every person in America, regardless of the color of their skin, have inherited those words. They now apply to me. And nobody is taking them away from me. And we're not going to allow them to take those words away from the American people, because the people who wrote those words and gave us those words were flawed human beings, just like every other human being that's ever walked the face of the earth except Jesus Christ. He should have said, it's time to teach the nobility of American history and restore a sense of pride in who we are as Americans and what our country has contributed to our nation, its citizens, and the world. Our founding fathers were flawed people, but they were also inspired and brilliant and courageous and determined and in many ways virtuous. Not perfect, but in many ways virtuous. And every American ought to admire them, tearing down their statues. We ought to be going to those statues and teaching about our founding fathers and who they were and what they stood for and where they came from and what their backgrounds were and why they thought the way they did and how they evolved throughout their lives. A man with the courage and determination of George Washington to be vilified because he happened to be born into an era of slavery is, to me, utterly ridiculous. I said he inherited his first slaves when his father died at the age of 10 years old. What was he supposed to do? Stand up and give a lecture about the evils of slavery? We just had a 13-year-old shot by police. I think that was in Chicago. 13-year-old shot by police, and suddenly he's a victim. He's out in the middle of the night, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, firing a gun. They're claiming that he threw the gun away before he turned toward the cop. But they said the cop had, I think, 0.8 of a second to make the determination of whether he was turning to shoot or just what was going on. And the poor kid lost his life. What was the first thing we say? Oh, he came from a poor family. He came under the influence of gangs. And we start to put that kid in context and try to understand his behavior. But we don't have the same grace toward our founding fathers because, frankly, folks, the people who are doing this and are trying to inculcate this nonsense into the brains of many of our citizens, it is not because they really believe that the founding fathers were that bad. It's because they hate America and they want to dismantle this country and they want to undermine it. In order to undermine it, you've got to undermine its founders and show that they were so messed up that nothing that they produced could be worth maintaining. Out with the Constitution, out with the Declaration. That's a whole bunch of garbage because, after all, it was given to us by a bunch of men who owned slaves. And now we can begin to rebuild this nation as a socialist or Marxist construct. Not on my watch. And these are the things that Joe Biden should be saying, but he won't, because he's as weak and as indoctrinated as all of these other leftists. He's bought lock, stock, and barrel into it. He's drunk the Kool-Aid. Let's see. I think I've covered it all. I am going to start responding to every presidential address until we get a president who I think is speaking to the American people with a sense of wisdom and love for our country and love for all of our people and a desire to bring us together to continue to make us a more perfect union. I made that decision when shortly after this president got elected, that I was going to be vigilant in responding to the things that he does. And this is the first step in that process. So when he gives a State of the Union address, I will be back with you to respond to that. And I want to thank you all for your prayers and your support. Go to standamerica.us to learn more about the things that we're doing, because we have a program to address this whole issue of racial division and racial demagoguery called Awakening Hearts and Minds, to help Black and Hispanic and Asian and Indian and Native Americans to understand that they're being lied to, manipulated, used like pawns in the power game of the left and the Democrat Party. And it's time to set the captives free. Free for your children to fulfill their God-given gifts and talents and abilities and go to the highest place that those talents will take them. Free to appreciate the opportunities that you have been given as an American that are unique in the annals of human history. Free for us as Americans across all racial and cultural lines to care about each other, to work together, to enjoy one another, to learn from one another, to enrich and enhance one another's lives by our different backgrounds and experiences, not to hate one another and somehow claim that one set is oppressors and one set is victims. And no, it's time for Americans to come together. One family, one great American family, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm Bishop E.W. Jackson, founder and president of STAND, staying true to America's national destiny, because that's what I'm committed to doing. And remember, my friends, we cannot be defeated if we will not quit.